Hello everyone. This is the 46th part of the story, Magical Journey in Harry Potter World. Chapter 123, Mastering Apparition, Plans, and Dreams. Pop! Quinn vanished from his spot and appeared near Axel, who was standing under a tree. Pop, grinned Quinn, enjoying his new ability to apparate. It was 2 days after Quinn learned to apparate. On the first day, he had shocked both Axel and Halder by succeeding apparition in mere 3 tries. At first, both of them thought that Quinn had gotten lucky, but then he proceeded to apparate 5 times in a row and established that it wasn't a fluke. On the second day, Halder repeated the exercise from the first day and kept it safe. He wanted Quinn to get used to the feeling of apparition before moving on. Axel looked at Quinn, who was grinning, and asked, "If you want, we can switch instructors and join someone more competent." Now, what would prompt you to say that? Questioned Quinn. You saw how he arrived yesterday, pointed Axel. He was clearly hungover and not prepared. That wasn't professional. You already understand the first level of apparition. So, if you want, we can go and choose another instructor. I know some good ones and can arrange classes with them by the end of the day. Axel didn't have a positive impression of Halder. He didn't like those who didn't take their job seriously, and Halder coming to his job in an unsightly manner didn't make a good impression. Quinn shook his head with a small smile. Actually, I think Halder is a good teacher. A teacher needs to be 2 things to be a good educator. First, they need to be good at what they teach, and Halder was clearly good at apparition. Quinn, too, had noticed Halder's condition when he had arrived, but he also noticed something else. Halder wasn't feeling good, and from the looks of it, he was feeling it bad, yet he still apparat without a problem. Despite suffering from what I am guessing, headaches, nausea, and dizziness, which are all big red signs for not apparating, he did it without splinching. That just shows he is good at apparition, shrugged Quinn. Point the second, a teacher needs to be good at teaching, continued Quinn. If Halder wasn't good at explaining, it wouldn't matter how good he was at his craft. Halder taught just fine. If he was hungover yesterday and I still managed to apparate, then I'm sure that he would do better today, given that he isn't hungover. A light pop was heard behind them. Speaking of the devil, said Quinn and saw Halder standing at a distance from them. See, he is better today. Unlike yesterday, when Halder arrived with a messy appearance, uncombed hair, rumpled clothes, black circles under his eyes, and his mood was also down. Today's Halder looked like he had taken a bath, used a comb on his hair, wore clothes that weren't from the last day, and had a good night's sleep. Good morning, greeted Halder, his voice held more energy than yesterday. Morning, replied Quinn while Axel silently nodded. Halder beckoned Quinn to the center of the field and started today's lesson. Yesterday, we got you familiarized with apparition. And you somehow grasped it quickly, too quickly, really quickly, said Halder. He still couldn't believe what Quinn had accomplished yesterday. So today, we will be moving on and practice the next step. Follow me. Halder and Quinn walked to the edge of the circular clearing, just beneath the trees surrounding the clearing, which Halder used as his instruction center. Yesterday, we stuck to apparating to a 3-meter, 10 feet, distance, recapped Halder. So today, we will be going beyond that and go further. He pointed somewhere around the center of the circular clearing and expressed. The distance from here to the center of the field is 30 meters, 100 feet. I want you to apparate to the center. Halder then, without any warning, disapparated from beside Quinn and appeared at the center of the field. Right around here, shouted Halder as he looked at Quinn from his new spot. Quinn grinned, visualized his destination, covered his body with magic, triggered the apparition magic, and then let the magic do its work. Halder watched Quinn disapparate from his spot and was expecting Quinn to appear beside him, but Quinn didn't. Halder heard the loud pop and looked in that direction to see Quinn standing near the opposite edge of the clearing and was waving his hand. How about we move on to the next step, beamed Quinn, traveling double the distance Halder had specified. You should change the exercise to something more fun. Halder looked at Quinn and felt amazed. When still new to apparating, people tend to be scared about apparating to lengthy distances. Unlike Quinn, a majority of people experienced splinching or at the very least witnessed splinching while learning. And that created a slight fear about apparating longer distances. but Quinn lacked the experience of splinching and thus lacked the fear. He understood that as long as the distances weren't changed exponentially, the difficulty remained the same. Well, let's do something else, sighed Halder and called Quinn closer, who apparat to arrive near Halder. Halder took out a thin tie from his pocket and handed it to Quinn. Blindfold yourself with this, and then you will try apparating without your sight. You will try to picture the place and apparate to it. He pointed back to the initial spot Quinn apparate from and continued. Apparate back the point we started from. You won't be able to see it, so let's see how strong your imagination is. It's all about the image, Quinn. It all starts with the picture in your head. Quinn shrugged and wrapped the tie around his eyes and secured it tightly so that he couldn't see anything. This is different from Tehom's delight, thought Quinn. The time spent in Tehom's delight had taught Quinn that lack of sense wasn't a bad thing. He had spent a lot of time in the darkness of Tehom's delight before he got the ripple sonar. All that time had numbed to the lack of sight, numbness of hearing, the dullness of touch, altered hearing, and scent deadness. Quinn imagined the spot he apparat from and then let the apparition magic do its work. And Halder and Axel watched as Quinn apparat to a destination that wasn't in his vision. How was it? Asked Quinn, still blindfolded and confident smile on his face. Did I get it right? Yes, you did, answered Halder. But before he could continue, Quinn disappeared and popped right in front of Halder. What's next? Halder blinked at his blindfolded student and sighed. Now, remove your blindfold. I have the next task for you. Quinn removed his blindfold and walked towards Halder as he described the task. Where are you staying? At a hotel. Is it warded against apparition? I haven't checked my room, but the lobby isn't warded against apparition. Where is it? Quinn turned to Axel and jutted with his chin. Halder turned to Axel and called out in Danish. Axel turned his attention to Halder and replied back in Danish. The two communicated about the hotel's location and how far it was from here. That works out for us, nodded Halder. The distance within the range that will be perfect for this. I want you to apparate to the hotel and come back. It's a distance much greater than the one you just traveled. If you are able to apparate to the hotel, it shows that you have the basics of apparition under your belt. The distance from Halder's apparition classes to Quinn's hotel was within the range most people used apparition for travel. It was nearly the same distance that the apparition license test in Denmark used as a benchmark. If a person could travel that distance, they would check one of the things off the list. All right, let's see if I can do it, nodded Quinn and loosened his body and was about to start the apparition magic when Axel spoke up. Wait. I will go to the hotel lobby first. If you mess up and splinch, I will be there to take care of you. And before he apparat, Axel advised, do remember to imagine the lobby. Specifically, the center of the lobby. That's what the hotel tells you to do. After then Axel apparat off to the hotel lobby. Quinn put his hands behind his back, his fake wand in his hands, and smiled. He stood straight up and looked at Halder while smiling. I will be back in a little bit. Then his body was taken by the apparition magic as he very momentarily traveled through the fabric of space, while his body was forced into a narrow pipe-like tunnel. On the other side, Quinn was greeted with the hustle and bustle of the hotel lobby. He looked around to see guests passing by the lobby, bellboys doing their services, and Axel standing in front of him. It seems I passed, didn't I? Said Quinn. Axel shook his head in reply. You still have to go back. He asked for a round trip. Then he disapparated back to Halder's apparition classes. The concierge behind the welcome counter looked at Axel disapparate after barely a minute of getting here. If it was another customer, he would have talked to them, but the instructions were very clear. Quinn and Axel could do practically anything and they wouldn't get in trouble. That's technically true, said Quinn with an accepting nod, but then turned to face the entrance to the hotel. It showed the street outside, and Quinn could see non-magical folk walking by and cars driving on the road. The people outside couldn't see into the hotel. It had been charmed to show a closed and locked door. And over that, the area had been charmed with a non-magical repellent ward, which made sure that no non-magical would even give the building the first look, forget about a second look. According to the International Statute of Magical Secrecy, Every magical building near a non-magical area was required to ward off the buildings with extra precaution. The hotel followed the code to a T. The entire building wouldn't attract the eyes of any non-magical person, theoretically cutting it off to anyone who couldn't interact with magic. Wondered Quinn and stared at the view outside. It's the third day. Should I? If he included the day he went sightseeing with Axel, it was the fourth day. And in those 4 days, Quinn had dragged out Axel every day to show him more of the magical community. And Denmark had been fun, but Quinn had some other plans regarding Denmark and the magical community in Aarhus. But after giving it a thought, he shook his head and looked away and apparated away with a final thought. I will start tomorrow. It will be fun. Scene break. Thousands of miles away, the boy called Harry Potter woke with a start. Harry Potter lay flat on his back, breathing hard as though he had been running. He had awoken from a vivid dream with his hands pressed over his face. The old scar on Harry's forehead shaped like a bolt of lightning was burning beneath his fingers as though someone had just pressed a white-hot wire to his skin. He sat up, one hand still on his scar, the other reaching out in the darkness for his glasses, which were on the bedside table. He put them on, and his bedroom came into clearer focus, lit by a faint, misty orange light that was filtering through the curtains from the street lamp outside the window. Harry ran his fingers over the scar again. It was still painful. Harry turned on the lamp beside him, scrambled out of bed and crossed the room. He opened his wardrobe and peered into the mirror on the inside of the door. A 14-year boy looked back at him, his bright green eyes puzzled under his untidy black hair. He examined the lightning bolt scar of his reflection more closely. It looked normal, but it was still stinging. Harry tried to recall what he had been dreaming about before he had awoken. It had seemed so real. There had been 2 people he knew and 1 he didn't. He concentrated hard, frowning, trying to remember. The dim picture of a darkened room came to him. There had been a snake on a hearth rug, a small man called Peter, nicknamed Wormtail, and a cold, high voice, the voice of Lord Voldemort. Harry felt as though an ice cube had slipped down into his stomach at the very thought. Harry concentrated on the image of Peter. He looked so different from the picture he had seen in the posters. Wormtail, as Harry had heard in the dream, was a thin man rather than the fat in the poster. No wonder no one recognized him, he looked completely different. He closed his eyes tightly and tried to remember what Voldemort had looked like, but it was impossible. All Harry knew was that at the moment when Voldemort's chair had swung around, and he, Harry, had seen what was sitting in it. He had felt a spasm of horror, which had awoken him, or had that been the pain in his scar? And who had the old man been? For there had definitely been an old man in his dream. Harry had watched him fall to the ground. It was all becoming confused. Harry put his face into his hands, blocking out his bedroom, trying to hold on to the picture of that dimly lit room, but it was like trying to keep water in his cupped hands. The details were now trickling away as fast as he tried to hold on to them. Voldemort and Wormtail had been talking about someone they had killed, though Harry could not remember the name, and they had been plotting to kill someone else. No, he could remember something. It was a woman. He could barely remember Wormtail talking about a woman and some kind of cup. But as seconds passed, that image was also sinking away. Harry took his face out of his hands, opened his eyes, and stared around his bedroom as though expecting to see something unusual there. But instead of his usual room, there was nothing that stood out as unusual. A large wooden trunk stood open at the foot of his bed, revealing a cauldron and assorted spellbooks. Rolls of parchment littered that part of his desk that was not taken up by the large, empty cage in which his snowy owl, Hedwig, usually perched. On the floor beside his bed, a book lay open. Harry had been reading it before he fell asleep last night. The pictures in this book were all moving. Men in bright orange robes were zooming in and out of sight on broomsticks, throwing a red ball to one another. Harry walked over to the book, picked it up, and watched one of the wizards score a spectacular goal by putting the ball through a 50-foot-high hoop. Then he snapped the book shut. Even Quidditch, in Harry's opinion, the best sport in the world, couldn't distract him at the moment. Harry went restlessly back to the bed and sat down on it, running a finger over his scar again. It wasn't the pain that bothered him. Harry was no stranger to pain and injury. He had lost all the bones from his right arm once and had them painfully regrown in a night. The same arm had been pierced by a venomous foot-long fang not long afterward. Only last year, Harry had fallen 50 feet from an airborne broomstick. He was used to bizarre accidents and injuries. They were unavoidable if you attended Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and had a knack for attracting a lot of trouble. No, the thing that bothered Harry was that the last time his scar had hurt him, it had been because Voldemort had been close by. But Voldemort couldn't be here, now. The idea of Voldemort lurking in Godric Hollow was absurd, impossible. Harry knew a thing or two about his house. This was the house where Voldemort had come to kill him but had instead died. At least, the ground was the same, the house itself was dismantled down and built anew. When he had met Voldemort in his first year, and Quirrell had burned on touching him. And after that night, his parents had told him that because of ancient magic that his grandmother had cast, Voldemort couldn't touch him or harm him. As long as Harry lived with his family in this house, Voldemort wouldn't harm him. Harry shook himself mentally, he was being stupid. There was no one in the house with him except his father, mother, and Ivy, and they were plainly still asleep, their dreams untroubled and painless. And he liked it to keep it that way. They didn't need to be worried for him. At least for now, he didn't want to wake them up and ruin their night's sleep. He went back to bed and laid back down on his bed. Harry's lamp seemed to grow dimmer as the cold grey light that precedes sunrise slowly crept into the room. But Harry didn't notice that he had been forgetting. That the images of the dream were slipping away from his mind. He didn't know that the moment he went back to sleep, he would forget about the dream until the moment something that would trigger this specific memory. The residents of Godric Hollow slept in peace, not knowing the turbulent year in front of them. Chapter 124, Self-Exploring, Nordic, Squabble. Axel Thorne sat on the sofa in the lounge area of the hotel's master suite, booked for Quinn to stay in for his time in Denmark, reading the newspaper Daily Eyewitness for the daily happenings in the community. He, too, had been staying with Quinn instead of living in the comfort of his own home. The instructions for his job had been clear, he was to stay with Quinn and don't leave him alone. It was 8 days since Quinn had arrived in Aarhus, Denmark, and today was also the last day of his stay here. Tomorrow morning, the portkey back to Quinn's home, Herefordshire in West Midlands of England, would activate, and Quinn West would return to his own country, setting Axel free from being a chaperone so that he could return to his actual and much more meaningful job. He looked up from his newspaper to the closed door of the master bedroom that Quinn was using. The British teenager had been spending a lot of his time inside his room since day 5. Quinn would wake up at the same time as him and would go work out at a park nearby, wash up, eat breakfast at a new restaurant, and then they would go to Halder's apparition classes to learn apparition. They would return after Quinn spent 2 to 3 hours practicing apparition. A time that both he and Halder believed to be a ridiculous amount of time to devote to apparition magic every day. Most people would practice it for a quarter of an hour each session and not the time Quinn put in. They would return just before lunch and eat their second meal at a new restaurant yet again, and then Quinn would rest for an hour in his room before he would drag him to explore more of the community for the rest of the day and call it a day, after eating dinner at a new restaurant. After that, Quinn would retreat into his room, and it would be the last time Axel would see him for the day. But this tourist guide routine changed on the 5th day when Quinn didn't ask him to continue exploring his homeland, and choose to rest for the day inside his room. Axel assumed it was magic fatigue from the long sessions of apparition every day. Apparition magic was magic-heavy sorcery, and it was already astonishing that Quinn was able to go 3 days without choosing to rest after spending more than 2 hours of continuous apparitions. Axel's assumption seemed right when on the 6th day, Quinn once again asked him to be his guide for the day, and they repeated the routine they had been following. Quinn seemed to be feeling as energetic as ever, suggesting that the day's rest had worked for the magic recovery. But then the same thing happened on the 7th day when Quinn decided to stay inside his room for the entire day, only coming out for meals at new restaurants. And today, on the 8th day, Quinn was once again holed up in his room after returning from apparition classes and lunch. Axel raised his wrist to check the time on his watch and saw that the time was 5 in the evening and decided to check on Quinn. Quinn had been civil in his stay here with him and hadn't given him much trouble, unlike what the briefing had warned him. Today was Quinn's last day in Denmark, and Axel wanted to find if he wanted to go out today. Axel got up from his sofa and walked to Quinn's door. "Quinn," called Axel, knocking on the door. then waited for his charge to answer, but no answer came from the inside. So he knocked on the door once again and called out a bit louder this time. Once again, the silence was returned to his calls. Axel's first thought was that Quinn was asleep and turned away from the door to let him sleep until it was time for dinner. But after talking a few steps away from Quinn's door, Axel stopped and turned back to the door. He thought back to the briefing he had been provided on Quinn, and another thought entered Axel's mind. Would he? No, right? He didn't give me any trouble, muttered Axel as he stood still for a moment before walking to Quinn's door and turning the door handle to open the door. Inside he saw that the candles were lit, bathing the room in light, but his eyes widened when he saw no signs of Quinn inside the room. Axel immediately entered the room, briskly walked to the attached bathroom, and opened the door to see it empty. Oh, no, spoke Axel as his hands tightened into a fist. Quinn West had evaded him without knowing, and he had no idea where the person he was supposed to protect was. Scene break. Quinn smiled as he walked through the biggest magical hotspots of Aarhus, wandering between the magical population of Denmark, which gathered to work, shop, and enjoy themselves. The streets he strolled through were similar to the ones of Dagon Alley and the other markets surrounding it. He had already visited the area with Axel, so he knew the layout and had memorized the streets. Occlumency had helped him greatly to remember the details needed to navigate without the assistance of Axel or any other native. Exploring with Axel was fine and all, but the Danish chaperone stuck to the shops in the central area and some of the local spots he knew from living in Aarhus, refusing to be adventurous and detour to new and exciting places. Places similar to Nocturne Alley back home. Places frequented by those who deal in the so-called darker arts, thought Quinn as he browsed through the shops on the central street where people who wanted nothing to do with the darker aspect of the society. These were the places that Axel took him to, but Quinn was only in Denmark for a week and didn't have much time, so he needed to move along and dive deeper to get what he wanted. And to accomplish that, he started to sneak out of the hotel room starting from the 5th day. It wasn't easy to get past Axel, as it turned out, his chaperone was great at his job. It had taken a bit of magic to get past without Axel being aware that he was gone. Quinn had employed very subtle use of confundus charms, illusion magic, sound magic, and watching his timing of sneaking out. He was successful on his first day, which turned out to be great because it didn't arouse Axel's suspicion, and Quinn could easily sneak out today and the day yesterday. He had to stay with Axel on the 6th day to check if the Danish man was suspicious. Fortunately, Axel didn't have any inkling of what had transpired. Quinn ducked into a dark alley between two buildings, momentarily distancing himself from the crowd. No one came out of the tunnel for a full minute before a grown man with golden hair and blue eyes walked out of the dark alley with a handsome smile on his face. He casually walked back into the crowd and continued to walk among them with his hands behind his back, but if one was paying attention, they would notice that the man was trying not to make even the slightest contact with anyone. The man was, of course, Quinn West, albeit not in his usual form. This was the form Quinn used to mingle amongst the market while hiding himself from everyone. There were a couple of ways through which a person could change their appearance. The ones Quinn knew were polyjuice potion that could copy the target's appearance to a T, full body transfiguration to alter the body structure, and finally, illusion magic to cast a glamour that would deceive the eyes of an observer. Polyjuice potion wasn't usable in this situation because Quinn didn't have any hair from a British person, and taking hair from a Danish person would be risky with chances of getting recognized. Plus, the polyjuice potion took a month to brew, and Quinn only had a few doses that he was saving for emergencies. Full body transfiguration was an application of transfiguring the body to alter the structure and appearance to resemble someone else. The concept was a simpler version of what a metamorphomagus did instinctively on a daily basis. A highly skilled and trained transfiguration master who specialized in self-transfiguration could recreate a metamorphomagus's genetic ability. What came naturally to a metamorphomagi required hard work to a person who lacked the trait. Quinn, on his current level, could perform a self-full-body transfiguration. But not on a level where he could change his body structure on a whim. The last option was illusion magic, something Quinn was quite skilled at, and it was the method he was using. The face he wore was an amalgamation of features from a couple of different people from non-magical England. A random face, yet slightly charming face, made from borrowed facial features to create something that couldn't be tracked as the person didn't exist. recreated by the use of illusion magic to sculpt a body over Quinn's actual body. The body was taller than Quinn's, meaning that if he were to turn his head, then the illusion's head a few inches above him would also turn the exact same way. If he raised his hand, then the surrounding illusion would raise his hand. If he grabbed something, then it would be through magically produced telekinesis. Even if Quinn collided with someone, then they would be coming in contact with a force field roughly in the shape of Quinn's illusion body, and they would feel like that they came in contact with an actual body through the means of tactile illusion magic that messed with the sense of touch, but it was best Quinn didn't come in contact with anyone at all. Prevention was better than cure, after all. Slowly the crowd thinned, and people started to turn away from the direction Quinn was walking in. The central area that shone with activity and beaming with lively air slowly faded into grey streets and dim buildings. The places turned dull and simple, but yet there was a freeness in the air. As Quinn walked, the few people in the different streets would give him a glance over for identification as if he was prey. The shopkeepers inside their shops would check him out to see if they could profit from him as they ripped him off his money for artifacts that would turn out to be a fake. But Quinn didn't give any of them a single look. He simply walked with a smile of confidence on his face that radiated that he belonged here and knew what he was doing. Walking for 5 minutes and deep into a darker side of the Danish magical community, Quinn arrived at a storefront with no signboard on it. None of the stores in this part of the area had name boards. The people who visited here either already the names and function of the shops. If they were new, the information was communicated via word of mouth. No advertisement was ever required or necessary. Quinn had gotten the information about the entire region on the first day when he let a woman lure him into a shop where she tried to con him into buying a book that she described as a grimoire with 1,000 ancient spells. Quinn let her talk and went along by pretending to believe her lies. In actuality, he was simply listening to gain time as he used legilimency on her to find all he needed to know about the place known as RKE Gate. The door chime over the door rang while it loudly creaked open as Quinn entered the store. The ringing and creaking filled the otherwise quiet store, alerting an old man behind the counter who had his eyes closed to open them to see Quinn's illusion form standing there. "Mr. John," greeted the old man. "You're here once again." Quinn, or the name he was using, John without a family name, just like Halder greeted back. "Of course, old man Gamel. You've things that I'm interested in, and you drive a hard bargain. But today, I'm going to get what I want." The old owner of the store chuckled slyly. "You're asking me for something precious, Mr. John." He then looked at Quinn with a gaze as clever as a fox. "Not only it's precious, but the tomes you seek are also dangerous. If I give them to you, would you be able to handle them?" Quinn, in the form of John, laughed lightly. "Thank you for your concern, old man Gamel. But I will be fine." He then reached into his clothes and took out a medium-sized pouch and jiggled it for the bag to make clinking sounds. "I have coin and lot of it. You want it, so let's put an end to this farce, and you tell me how much do you want." Gamel, the shop owner, was able to speak English, and because Quinn couldn't speak Danish, he had to communicate with someone who spoke English. Gamel was one of them, and he had the thing that Quinn wanted. The old man stood up from his seat and walked to the back room of the simple store with his walking stick for support. Gamel returned with an ancient tome in his hands. It had a thick brown case as its cover, and the pages inside were thick parchment which had turned yellow with time. The tome looked like it could fall apart any moment, and yet Quinn knew that it wouldn't fall apart. He could feel traces of esoteric magic coming from the tome, and that's what told him that the ancient tome was the real deal and not just some old book. Gamel set down the tome on the counter, and there was word engraved on the thick leather-bound cover of the tome. "Book." That was all the cover of the tome said. But that wasn't important, the important thing was the language of the word. Quinn was able to read it because he knew the characters. It was written in runes and a type of runic language he recognized. Younger Futhark, thought Quinn, and looked up at old man Gamel when he said the source of this book. The tome is from the Nordic warlocks of the Viking Age. Vikings. It was the modern name given to seafaring Nordic pirates from southern Scandinavia, who, from the late 8th to the late 11th centuries, raided, pirated, traded, and settled throughout parts of Europe. They also voyaged as far as the Mediterranean, North Africa, the Middle East, and North America. And in this world, with the presence of magic, there existed Nordic magicals, who called themselves Nordic warlocks. A subgroup of magicals that practiced and developed magic that was rumored to have destructive capabilities that could wipe out areas, without traces. Quinn didn't know if the rumors were true or not. He didn't know if the records were exaggerated to boast the power of Nordic warlocks. All he knew was if there was smoke, then there must be a fire. The Vikings had their own laws, art, and architecture. Most Vikings were also farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, and traders. Popular conceptions of the Vikings often strongly differ from the complex, advanced civilization that emerged from archaeology and historical sources. This meant that the romanticized picture of Vikings as noble savages must have come from a place where people really felt despair. And Quinn believed that it was those Nordic warlocks' actions that completely changed the conception of Vikings as it was today. So when Quinn came to Denmark, which was once part of the Vikings' homeland, he couldn't let a chance like this get away from him. Quinn wanted to see if there was a way he could find the tomes from an age that closely preceded even the Hogwarts founders. And to his luck, Quinn was able to find a single book that held magic inside. Quinn's razor-sharp magical focus, which allowed him to do spells without an external focus, picked up the traces of esoteric magic hidden behind the old tome. The clever old Gamel, too, realized that this tome was somehow significant, so he jacked up the price. And Quinn had to come back every day because he wanted that book, but he would not fork the ridiculous amount Gamel asked for. At least not until the very last moment, at which point he would give the money and take the risk. Quinn didn't know what the book held. It could be a tome with basic level spells or even a memoir preserved like a magical tome. Meaning that it could be useless to Quinn, and he would have wasted his time and money. "You know the price," said Gamel, still persistent on the price he had quoted to Quinn yesterday. "That's ridiculous, and you know it," sighed Quinn with the voice he had chosen for John. "I'm going to be generous and raise my offer by 100. But this is my last offer. Any more than this, and it won't be worth it." Gamel remained silent for a moment before returning. 200. 125 and not a single more, said Quinn shaking his head. 175. 125. 170. 125. Gamel sighed and nodded in acceptance. "I will take it." Quinn put down the pouch in his hand on the table and then took out 2 more pouches and slid the 3 to Gamel. "Do count." Gamel didn't need to be told as he counted the golden currency of Denmark's magical society, and checked random ones with his wand for authenticity. "It's the correct amount. You can take the book." "That's good," said Quinn, picking up the tome and slipping it inside his expanded pocket. "It was a pleasure doing business with you." Quinn turned back towards the door to leave, and just as he was about to exit, 2 men appeared and blocked Quinn's path. Quinn recognized both of them as he had seen them every time he entered and exited MRKE gate. Quinn stopped for a second before trying to get past the 2 men standing at the door, but one of them stepped directly in front of Quinn and stared down at him. Quinn looked at them and saw that both of them had wands in their hands. "The price has doubled, John," heard Quinn from his behind. "You need to give me the other half." Quinn turned back towards Gamel and saw the old man looking at him with an apathetic gaze and a natural smile. "Gamel, I don't want any trouble," spoke Quinn, trying to reason. "We already did the exchange. I got my book, and you got your coin. You don't have to make it like this." Gamel shrugged, but his look didn't change. "Pay me or leave the book behind." Quinn stared at Gamel for a second before asking. "If I give the book back, then will I get my money back? Let's pretend this purchase never happened." "I'm sorry, but I can't agree to that, John. I will be keeping that as a service fee." Quinn sighed and groaned as he covered his face with his hands. The illusion of John did the same. "All right, I understand," spoke Quinn from behind his hands. Gamel and his 2 helpers smiled when they heard Quinn. They were going to get paid double the price for a stupid book that Gamel had lying around from before he could remember. And he wouldn't get in trouble because he realized that Quinn, John, was a foreigner and not a local. Tourists were always an easy target. "It's good that you understand, John." "It's good for everyone this way," replied Gamel, his smile widening. But then he felt confused when he saw Quinn remove his hands, and there wasn't a single touch of worry on his face. Gamel saw Quinn raise his hand, and suddenly his two helpers went rigid. He watched as his two helpers turned pale and started to shake and struggle. "I warned you, Gamel," said Quinn, walking towards Gamel. Gamel hastily turned his eye to Quinn and raised his wand in a warning. "Don't come near, or I will attack." Quinn looked at the wand lazily, and it went flying away out of Gamel's hand, shocking the old man. "I'm feeling good today, Gamel," said Quinn as he picked up the 3 pouches that he had paid Gamel while staring into his eyes. "So I won't do anything to you. You brought me this book and because you're old. I will leave you alone. But the other boys won't be so lucky." Quinn blinked, and cracking was heard in the store. And then muffled screams filled the store as the 2 men collapsed on the floor. They couldn't move an inch, and it was like something had bound every inch of their body. And then they felt the pain come in, but because they couldn't even open their mouths, the screams were muffled. "I broke every bone in their arms and legs," answered Quinn. "They are in a tremendous amount of pain. I did it in a way that small shrapnels of bones are digging away at their flesh from inside. They won't die from this, but those small pieces of bone will continue to tear through their arms and legs." Gamels gulped when he looked into Quinn's eyes and heard his words. Quinn tapped his knuckles against the table and continued. "It's easy to rid them of their pain. You just have to vanish the bones, and they will be fine." Quinn twitched his finger, and Gamel's wand came flying up from the floor. "But the deal is that you won't be able to vanish anything because dash." Quinn held Gamel's wand in his hand and snapped it. "You don't have a wand anymore." Quinn dropped the pieces on the counter and then stroked one of Gamel's cheeks. "I know you do shady business, but do it honorably. Because someday, someone like me won't be in a good mood. Someday, you might just be lying on the floor with your bones broken. I hope you have a good day, Gamel." Quinn pocketed the gold pouches, turned back, and walked away. As he walked away, he broke the 2 men's wands. Just before he exited the store, Quinn turned back and smiled at Gamel. "Oh, before I forgot. I can't have you call for help, can I?" Gamel's eyes widened before everything went black as he was stunned. Quinn closed the door behind as he exited the store, and as the door closed, the binding charm that holding the 2 men in place broke, and they started to thrash around in pain. The bone shrapnels dug deeper into their bodies, causing more pain. It would be a couple minutes later when someone passing by would hear faint screams, and look inside to see 2 men limp on the ground on the verge of fainting and an old man hunched over a counter. This marks the end of part 46 of the story, Magical Journey in Harry Potter World. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.